Formula Access. Hang on, prepare yourself. This could quite possibly be one of those guests that I had on that I might have gone too long because I couldn't stop talking. There's definitely going to be an episode 2. And if you've listened to anyone's, I am introing most of these episodes in the same way. Mark Arnall is a performance coach today for Sebastian Vettel. He was the performance coach for Kimi Raikkonen for 18 years and also the brief performance coach for Mika Hakkinen. So this gentleman has coached many champions. He's been through many championships. He's been through many wins. He's got a lot to tell. This is an episode for Formula One fans, for driver fans, and for high-performing people. I try to embed a lot of this high-performance business into my podcast as well as an entrepreneur myself. So seriously, sit down, get comfortable, grab a cup of coffee, enjoy. There will be a part 2. We are already emailing back and forth. I recorded this about a week ago, and we are already laying out the groundwork for conversations for our next episode. Comment below on anything you'd like to learn about and anything you'd like to hear about, because Mark is an open book. He's an awesome guy. You guys, we should have him on 3, 4, 5, 10 times. So enjoy. Formula Access. Good afternoon. I am bringing you a very, very special guest today who has quite the resume, who has worked with drivers with big names such as Kimi Raikkonen, Mika Hakkinen, and David Coulthard. I am so honored to have Mark Arnall on the show today. Mark, welcome.
Hey, thank you, Ron. Nice to be here.
We are really excited to have you. I saw these names this morning, and if I'm totally honest with you, I actually didn't see that until this morning, and I was just I thought you were a contract coach with the team specifically, and then I went through your resume and I was like, holy cow, okay, I've got to change up my questions here.
Maybe this will go on a little bit longer than we thought then.
It's taken quite a bit to align schedules. I know you're traveling the world, and I'm kind of anxious to see what your resume is as of today. But just to kind of inform the audience, you know, who are you, you know, and what are you doing today?
Yeah, so at the moment I'm obviously still in Formula One. I'm working with Sebastian Vettel at the moment for this season. So I'm in between races. This season for me has actually been a little bit different because it's the first season I've done where I haven't done all the races. So at the minute I'm splitting the role with another trainer, and we're doing half the races each. Antti, who has been working with Seb for quite a while, his wife had a baby, so they obviously wanted to spend more time together. One of the biggest negatives in Formula One, if you like, is just the amount of time we travel. If you have a family, it's not so easy. So I think Antti had spoken to Seb, sort of asking if he could have sort of a little bit of a sort of different season and use me for half the races. And I worked with Seb and Antti in Ferrari for 4 years, so we knew each other very well. So yeah, like I say, it's just a different season, different dynamic, but it's actually been very nice to have a situation where we have a little bit more of a life outside of the racing.
So you're not with them during an off week, or you're not, you know, attached to them at the hip?
With Kimi, with Mika in the past, I was, and for this year now I'm not. So it's my role this year has really just been to do the races with Sebastian. So I haven't done, unless we've been in between 2 of the flyaway races, Singapore, Japan. Sort of in between a couple of these sort of races, we'll spend a little bit of extra time together. Pre-Singapore, we're there a little bit earlier, so there's a bit more time, but the specifics in between the races has been my own time.
I gotta say that I've really enjoyed Sebastian this year. He just, I don't know, he just seems so much more relaxed than his days at Ferrari, and just more at peace and at home, and just kind of, you know, call it let himself go. Like, he just seems like the guy we all kind of remember from Red Bull. It's been really cool to see him. I kind of wish he was around for a bit longer with
Yeah,
this
sure.
this personality.
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny one because I obviously know him from the Ferrari days, and I think him and Kimi always got on really well. So there was a few times in the past he'd fly with us to some of the tests, and I've followed his career for a long time, and it's been a real pleasure working with him. He's a super nice guy, very down to earth, very focused, but he likes to have fun. I think he just likes to see people around him enjoy their life. And you get that vibe from him. So I think it's sad for the sport that he's stopping. And I think a lot of people in the paddock will miss him. I think a lot of fans will miss him. So but it's like I say, it's been a pleasure working with him.
I feel like even the drivers will miss him too. There was an article, he was in a little scrap with Magnussen, and Magnussen was like, that was some of the best racing I've had, and it's this like mutual experienced respect on the track of like, yeah, let's not take each other out. Let's have a good go at it. And you get that with a guy like Seb. I've been a huge fan. I like an underdog. I like somebody that's really scrappy. I loved him at Red Bull. I was really excited for him to go to Ferrari, and even at Aston Martin, I wish that project would have gotten going quicker so he could see some of the glory days again. So you're a performance coach, and and pardon the terminology between the States and the UK, but you're also a therapist as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, I think I mean, we call ourselves performance coaches because I think that kind of just defines the job, if you like. But it's, for me, it's the training side of things, all the physical training. I'm trained as a sports therapist, so I do all of the soft tissue work and dry needling and the therapy based stuff as well. I get involved with the nutrition, but I think the role in general, there's all of that, which is what people kind of look at our roles being. But then there's also all of the other stuff that goes with it. So the jet lag planning, it's been a massive part of what I've done over the years. Working with Kimi, I booked all of the flights, all of the hotels, because then I could macro manage all of that jet lag planning, because as you probably gathered, there's no logical order to the races. Sometimes we're in Australia, then we're in South America, then we're in sort of Asia, North America, Europe. So it's not an easy schedule to plan when you've got to have a driver peaking 22 to 24 times a year. So we do all of that, and then at the track we're responsible for all of the kit. So we liaise with the kit developers, whether that's Alpine Star or whether it's Puma or whoever it might be. So we kind of like take ownership of that role to make sure everything fits, to make sure we've got enough of it. We liaise with the team people that are responsible for those sort of certain things. Then we liaise with the marketing department to try and sort of make sure the schedule over the weekend makes as much sense as possible from the driver timing. So that there are so many different components that go into it. So yes, our role is performance coach, but it really kind of looks at this whole holistic approach and how to try. I mean, my philosophy really is to try and make sure when the driver gets to the country we're racing in, there's as little stress as possible. So like I say, the flights are organized, the pickups are organized. Normally, I've been waiting with the hotel key, or I know someone at the hotel that's ready to kind of like be there with the keys, so we don't have a 20-minute check-in procedure if everyone's arriving at the same time. So it's kind of all of this stuff as well that goes into it.
With the increase in events, I mean, it's been a progression, and now you have news of adding another venue. You've had South Africa, now you have Colombia as a potential target. How much more imperative does your role get as they continue to add new venues? And they're not like, Austin and Dallas, they're talking about huge continental change here. So how imperative does your role get with that additional?
I think, to be perfectly honest, I think Formula One as a sport is growing. I think especially in the US, I noticed a big difference. And I understand the appeal. So I think Formula One wants to have a footprint in these different countries. These countries see the appeal of Formula One, sort of bringing Formula One into their environment. I think it's tough for everyone. I mean, it's already kind of on the limit to kind of manage. And I think, as I said a little bit before, if people have a family that's based in the UK, so the UK-based teams, I mean, you're talking like a triple header. The guys are away for 6 to 7 weeks. It's and it depends on the schedule, but you might be back for like a week, and then you're gone again for another 4. It's so I think it's difficult just to manage on a family personal level, if that's the situation you're in. Obviously, from a performance level, it then comes down to the whole jet lag planning. How can you arrange it in a way that allows the driver to recover enough to be on form for the next event? Like say, if you look at an Olympics or World Championships, I think the goal is to program everything to be at your peak for the Olympics, whereas a Formula One driver has to peak for every event, which is either a triple header or a double header or a race going from Australia to Bahrain or wherever it might be. So it's challenging for sure. And I think the more you can prepare and plan that, the easier it then becomes. But yeah, like I say, it's not just the driver. It's like the driver, if you like, is at the top of the pyramid. But we all have to follow that same schedule. And if you like, take it down to the basic level, hospitality staff, mechanics, they're the ones flying earlier. They're doing the really long hours. And I think sometimes it's one of those sort of situations where if you look at what could possibly go wrong, it's not necessarily just down to the driver or the engineer. It's like if the mechanic's so tired and they forget to do a bolt up, it's all of these things that come into the equations. I think when we talk about expanding the calendar, I think you have to look at, to a certain degree, rotating staff. But then you get to the situation of the pit stops. If you have a pit stop crew, it's like a dance. It's like choreography. The pit stop crew are trained to do their role and they do it exceptionally well. If you then start rotating people and you take a couple of people out of the pit stop and bring other people in, it naturally disrupts that harmony. So I think there's all of these things that come into it. But yeah, so it's not just about pure driver performance and how to manage them.
I have to say it's funny that you mentioned that, because I've got a couple of folks from hospitality, from a team side and an experiences side and some of the contractor side stuff. And they're actually the hardest to get a hold of, especially the last couple of weeks that have had double headers, because they're
sleep.
Yeah. And they're just, they'll message me at the most random hours. And, it's like sitting at the airport, waiting for a flight or a delay, or like, they'll send a selfie of them like crunched up on a chair at the airport, just like, this is not so glamorous, is it? It's funny to see that side of the sport.
Yeah, we always say when we're there, the glamorous side of F1. It's like there is glamour. That's what people see on TV, but it's not like that in real life.
So when you're not helping another coach and you're all in, if you're all in with Vettel or with Raikkonen, what is a typical off week like for you? So there's no race that week. What are you doing? How are you managing that?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because I think it depends what stage of the year you're at. So if you split just purely from a training point of view, the year, we use the first 2.5 months. That's when we get in a solid block of training. And if there's anything that we expect from the upcoming season, like, for example, if we know there's going to be more downforce in the car, if we know that the cornering speeds are going to be higher this year, we know the cars are going to be heavier. How do you prepare a driver for those challenges? So we use the first 2.5 months to train for that. And as soon as the season starts, it's really all about kind of like maintaining what you've done in that first kind of like 2.5 months. And I've always done things in a way where I've kind of tapered the training down as the season's gone on and up the recovery, because you cannot do everything to a super high level the whole year round. You've got the driving, you've got the travel, you've got the testing, the media commitments, all of these other components coming in. So for me, whilst maintaining the training and tapering it and increasing the recovery. I've always found that's the way to achieve the best results. So I think going back to your question, if we're more towards the end of the season, it would be more focused on the recovery side. Then, okay, we've got to hit the training sort of 110% between the races. If it's more at the beginning of the season, it could be a little bit more focused on more of the training stuff and what have we learned from the first 2 or 3 races. Has that challenge been more of a surprise? Are there other things we've got to work on? So so like I say, it's we try and make it fun as well. You know, fitness is one of these sort of things you have to do, the fitness stuff. And if you're talking core work and whatever else, it's something you make it as challenging as possible. But at the same time, you want to make things fun. So I've always incorporated things like climbing. We've done other sports that, for me, like climbing's always been a good one to use in the past because it's a lot of forearm strength, hand strength. It's a lot of mobility, flexibility. You have to focus on what you're doing, otherwise you tend to fall off. But it's also a fun thing to do. So I've always tried to kind of like throw some of these things into the equation as well, just to achieve the same thing, but without a snooze fest, basically. I mean, the good thing is all the drivers, they understand they have to work hard. So, and they do work incredibly hard, and every driver is a little bit different with the approach. But yeah, like I say, to answer your question, it would depend on the time of year.
So when you talk about recovery, is that not doing anything and allowing your body to settle? What does recovery for a Formula One driver look like?
Yeah, I think it's one of those sort of things where what does the individual need? And recovery isn't doing nothing. Recovery is maybe focusing more on the mobility, flexibility side of things. You're still doing the training, but maybe not quite to a high level. So with Kimi, we used to do a lot of biking, but sometimes if we wanted to do a good bike ride, go up into the hills, he had a couple of electric bikes. So maybe you can go on for longer, but you have some of the electric assistance. So it's not quite as challenging for the body as a proper full out bike ride. So it's a recovery ride per se. So you still get a training effect, but not quite to the same level of intensity. The nutritional side is super important for this. And I've always used a lot of blood work, urine analysis, stool analysis, blood testing, to measure stress markers, fatigue levels, and just keep an eye on all of that. So the nutritional component when it comes to recovery is also really important to make sure the body's getting what it needs to recover. Sometimes it's a little bit dependent on where we've come back from, what races we're in between. So, and like I say, it's a little bit tailored to the individual. Sometimes you still want to do the sport, so you make the sport more fun. Focus on all of maybe the therapy work, again, like I say, the flexibility, mobility side of things, but you're not pushing the training quite so hard.
I think, earlier bringing up a good point, like travel, so this is not my day job. And so the majority of my career has been, traveling, and, there have been quite a few years, doing 50 to 60 flights a year, and, not to the rigor of what you all are doing, but, that's still a lot for a professional. And I think the sport really identifies with type A personalities, at least what I've encountered in my travels and meeting fans. Is they're entrepreneurs, they're salespeople, they're, highly technical people, which is a degree of high performance. And I think there are a lot of elements of what you do that apply to those types of people. And I think of having to travel like that. It's one thing to do, East Coast to West Coast time, where you have a 2, 3, or 4 hour, 5-hour time difference. It's another thing to go to opposite sides of the globe, where night is day and day is night, and it really messes with you. But what does air travel do to the body? I mean, of a Formula One driver, that's a 80-hour-a-week job, and in my opinion, maybe more. What does air travel do? And I know many drivers are private, but I don't care, private or commercial, it's rough. What effect does that have on a body?
Yeah, I think some people, it affects some people more than others. I think if you look at the basics when you're on a plane in general, it's a super low humidity environment. So it's like when you're on there, it just sucks the moisture out of you. Every time you breathe, you lose moisture. So I think the dehydrating element is big. Obviously, um, what it also does is expose you to a whole host of different bugs and bacteria. So a big part of what we do in Formula One, how I plan things, is to try and make the environment on the plane clean, the whole transfer process clean. So trays that you put all your stuff in at security are a bug fest. So it's kind of like learning to kind of put as much as possible in the bag and then wash your hands afterwards, like mobile phones. People them next to their face the whole time, but they leave them in all sorts of bizarre places. Cleaning the area around you in the plane is like just to wipe everything down, because you don't know who sat there before you and whether they were sick or not. So it's if you look at purely the flying, it's the dehydration, obviously the time difference depending on where you're going. It's the exposure to bugs and bacteria and trying to make sure your immune system is as strong as possible to fight anything that you might pick up. Because if you have a Formula One driver that gets to a race and they're sick, they're obviously not going to perform to the level they need to perform. Because in Formula One, it's all about that last 1 to 2%. So if you're slightly off, it will affect you. And then, yeah, like I say, it's the time difference. So it's creating strategies to obviously have that impact you as little as possible. It's what you do before, it's what you do at the other end. So like I've always avoided the really high intensity training just before travel, because as good as it is for the body, it will have a negative impact on the immune system. It gives the immune system another challenge. And then when you get to the other end, it's like recovering, it's getting back into the training, but not doing anything too hard straight away. So the travel, like I say, it can, some people just struggle more with jet lag. Some people aren't so bad. I think for me, my body never knows where it is. So maybe it's not so much of an issue. I don't struggle with jet lag so much, but I've been sort of doing this for so long now that I have strategies that work. And I use fasting a lot on the flights as a way. And I've found that for me personally very successful to reduce the effects of jet lag.
What about the pressure in the seats? I see a chiropractor for wellness, and I feel I don't even have to tell them when I go in, but I'll go in and they'll say, "Well, you've been traveling a lot, haven't you?" And it's the whole spinal misalignment, and then the pressure is in your head, and it's creating headaches and swelling and just the puffiness. Does that, I mean, I've never flown private, but do all of these same elements exist in that world as well?
For sure. And private planes are no better than commercial planes for this sort of stuff. What I try and do is always book onto the newer planes like the Dreamliner, Airbus A350, because they've got a composite airframe. They can have more moisture in the cabin, so they can have a slightly higher level of humidity. So a lot of things that we think are jet lag, like the brain fog, the headaches, this is a lot due to things like dehydration. So these newer planes help combat that to a certain degree, and it's not a massive change, but it's a change in the right direction. The pressurization of the cabin, the altitude you're flying at is lower. So there's a theory that some of the symptoms that we get from jet lag are altitude related, and the newer planes fly at an internal cabin of a slightly lower altitude. So by trying to book the planes that are the newer models, I speak to a lot of business travelers and they just say, "Hey, wow, I flew on the Dreamliner, didn't have anywhere near as much jet lag as normal." So people do notice the difference. So like I put that as part of my plan. And these planes don't fly to every destination we need to go to. But where I can, I will book onto one of those planes, because it's part of the bigger jigsaw puzzle. If you can improve lots of different things or lots of little things, the overall result's going to be better. So, and then, like I say, you've just got lack of movement in the seat. A lot of people just sit in that position for a long period of time, which has an effect on the body. So you tend to get off the plane, again, in a way because of dehydration, where you just feel stiff and achy. So when I get to the hotel at the other end, it's rehydrating as much and efficiently as possible, going through a mobility flexibility session where I just kind of unwind my body. And I've always used that with the drivers, just to try and just get the body moving again afterwards.
What
So
that's a good point too. Like when you get back to the airport, I always think of the Die Hard scene in the movie where he tells him to go take his shoes off and curl his toes in the carpet. And every time somebody says that, that's what immediately comes to my head. Maybe it's my generation, but I mean, hotels are no cakewalk either. Right? And again, it's all relative, but I've stayed in very nice hotels before and it's not my bed. And that has an effect as well.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's funny because I remember the Die Hard scene, and traveling so much, I always think about it as well. I use a massage ball more. I use a massage ball more on my feet. But yeah, with the bed thing, it's absolutely true. I mean, it's not your bed, and some, like I say, I've worked with Kimi in the past, and he's had backache, lower backache, because the bed's too soft, and there's not much you can do to change the bed in the hotel. So it's sometimes you're just unlucky, or sometimes you just get a bed that doesn't agree with your particular body type. The room temperatures are different, and some of the hotels we go to, okay, we're privileged in the fact we tend to stay in nice hotels. It's super hot in some of the places, like I've stayed in Hockenheim before, no AC, 39 degrees, and you just cannot sleep because it's so hot. And this is where kind of like, you can, again, everyone's a little bit different, but having the temperature quite low in the room is a more positive thing, if you can adjust it like that. There are strategies you can use to help the sleep, but the bed, for sure, like I say, it's sometimes the bed just doesn't agree with you.
As far as fitness goes too, I mean, obviously, the more that I've traveled through my career, I find the hotels and I heart them or like them or save them. When I run into a hotel that has facilities, do you guys use those facilities? I mean, I can imagine what it's like to take, Sebastian Vettel into a Hilton fitness center and fans and selfies. Like, how do you guys work around that?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, to be perfectly honest. And I think, again, it depends where we are. So in Europe, we tend to arrive on the Thursday morning, and you're not going to do too much training. So the stuff we do, like with Sebastian, we do a lot of track running. So we run the track every weekend, maybe once or twice. So if you're there Thursday to Sunday, it's more recovery based, and you're not really going to go into the gym too much. Anything we're doing, flexibility, mobility work, you can do in the hotel room. If you're in, like in Singapore, for example, we went to one of the gyms in the city because the hotel gym just didn't have the equipment we wanted to do a particular workout that we were planning on doing. Luckily enough, it was quite quiet because we can go during the daytime. We're not there at 6 in the morning when the business sort of people are there before they go to work. We're not there in the evening. We can go at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Sometimes the hotels have good facilities, sometimes not. If I'm personally staying in a hotel, like when I choose the hotels, I book the ones with the better facilities because I want to train myself. And if I do want to take the driver to the gym, you want to make sure that they have as much equipment as you would need as possible. Sometimes where you're going, it's just not possible. So I've had to come up with a lot of training routines that you can do in a hotel room with either body weight, using mini bands, power bands, all of these sort of different tools. And you can create fantastic workouts like that. And I think what COVID taught a lot of people was, wow, you can do a lot of stuff at home. You don't necessarily need the gym. So I think like Japan, where we stay there, I think their gym, it was quite small and consisted of one bike. That was it, but they can call it a gym. And it's like, it's just not designed for that purpose. But if you're a little bit creative, you can use outside grass spaces at the hotel. You can use the hotel room. If they have a gym, great, you can do some sort of workout there. But yeah, like I say, going back to your question, I try and book the hotels with the best facilities possible. But sometimes, depending on where we're traveling, the hotels just do not have any facilities. And you also don't want to compromise the distance to the track. It has to work for the event. So you're not going to stay in a hotel that's an extra 35-minute drive just because it's got a great gym. There's the location to consider as well. So if you're in Melbourne, you have a lot of options because Melbourne has good hotels with good facilities, and they're all a similar distance from the track. If you're in Spa, then you're a lot more limited as to where you're going to stay and what facilities might be there. But like I say, with the European races, it's not so much of a concern.
Hilton has this new like one step to wellness or something like that. And I found this hotel in Dallas, and in my room was a Peloton bike and a gym rack with weights and hydration and protein. And I mean, I was sold the second I walked into that room, because I never even had to leave my room, or wait for some, big sweaty guy to get off a treadmill and not clean it. And
I think it's their 5 steps to fitness, they call it. And
that's it.
You're the first person I've actually spoken to that's found one and been there.
They're hard to find. And I have this weird Liam Neeson like skill set of finding people. And so when I'm a Peloton customer, and so I got an email and they're like, hey, we have, our objective is to get a Peloton bike in most Hilton rooms. And I'd sent an email and I was like, here's all the places I travel. Please send me a list of the hotels, because, it's nice. It really is nice. I have to, work around my travel, not my fitness, but.
Sure. Yeah, but it's a big thing as well. And I think you're used to training. I'm used to training. We don't mind going to a gym. If the gym's there, we'll go and use it. I think a lot of people get intimidated going to a gym. So if you have a hotel room that offers some of this sort of stuff, then they can play around with the exercises. They're not worried about who might be looking. They're not so intimidated. They can do it in their underpants. It's all of these sort of things, I think, bring in another element. And I think it's encouraging. I just don't think so many hotels are doing enough of that. But I speak to so many travelers, and they come up to me saying, look, Mark, I'm traveling. I'm putting on weight. I'm feeling unhealthy. I don't know what food to eat. I feel I'm eating too much. I've got to go for client dinners. What can I drink alcohol wise that doesn't have so many calories? Because I still want to be social, but I'm just developing such unhealthy habits. I come home, I'm tired. I look at myself in the mirror. How do you guys keep fit when you travel? And I think you have to be a bit disciplined about it. You have to find what works for you. You have to try and come up with a plan. So for me, I know that Fridays is the busiest day on the track. And realistically, I'm too busy to fit a decent workout in. I might be able to do something for 15, 20 minutes. So I plan the Friday as my off day. Thursday, I know what I'm going to do. Saturday, I know what I'm going to do. Sunday, I know what I'm going to do. So you try and kind of plan what you're going to do as you're traveling before you go. So you've at least got some idea in your head. But it's not easy. It's a challenge. And I think a lot of business travelers sort of struggle with the same things.
I'm gaining the sense that I'm going to have a large following of business travelers on this, because I know I struggled with this. 2019, before whatever.
Yeah.
I can't say the word, or YouTube will not allow this episode to do anything. But, I was so tired, so puffy. And, again, a lot of it was diet. And, you get to your room, you're tired, it's just like call room service. You end up getting some, gluten-filled burger, and, and then you wake up, you eat an unhealthy breakfast, you're at a work lunch, you get an unhealthy lunch, and then you're like, well, I'll eat healthy when I get home.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because myself and my girlfriend, Taya, she works in the hotel industry. She's a hotel consultant. And we set up a company to actually address some of these issues. So we launched a hotel project in Zermatt in Switzerland, the Hotel Zermatt. It's a small boutique hotel, but in an active destination. And we've got another hotel project launching in Zurich. And the whole point is we've put equipment into all the rooms. So people have the foam rollers, massage balls, exercise bands, mini bands. They can flick me onto the TV, but we introduced the healthy menu options. And it's early days. We only launched this year. But in Zermatt, the healthy things that we put on the menu are the second best selling on the whole menu. And people want the healthy food. And it was only beaten by Wiener Schnitzel. And I have to admit, the Wiener Schnitzel they serve is very good. But it was so popular for breakfast, for the lunch, for the dinner. And I think if you have the healthy options on the menu, people will take them because people do want to have the healthy options. But when you look at the hotel room service menu, it's club sandwich, burger, it's the options are so limited. There isn't necessarily anything healthy there, but business travelers do want that. So it's I can completely relate to what you're saying.
Man, you have to send me the name of this company because I'm going to scream about it here in the US. I will be traveling in 2023 quite a bit, and so, I'm starting to mentally prepare for this again. And yeah, very, very loyal Hilton member myself, so I will beat this into every Hilton chain that I go to. If
Sure, yeah, because honestly, it's the crazy thing is you can do it in an expensive way, like the 5 feet to fitness. To put that into a hotel room requires quite a big investment. But to have things like foam roller, massage ball, exercise bands, mini bands, it's not expensive.
right.
And there's two ways to look at it. You've got people that know how to train, that if you provide them with this equipment in the room, then they'll just get on with it and do it themselves. If you've got people that aren't quite sure, then they can watch a video and go through some sort of basic programs. If you put health, it's about this holistic approach. So it's kind of like, it's the training, it's the recovery side. What do you do when you arrive to the hotel from a long haul flight? How do you unwind the body? What you should eat? What should you eat? Get the fluid back inside, rehydrate. It's all of these different components come together. And like I say, the healthy options are a big part of it. The breakfast, there's so much choice sometimes with the breakfast buffet, and people go there and it's just like they overeat because there's so much, and they eat all of the wrong stuff, and then they wonder why they're struggling at 10:30, falling asleep or getting hungry again. So it's so like I say, there's things that a hotel could bring in, which is what we've tried to do with the projects we're working with, that aren't complicated, aren't super expensive, but give the guest an option to do something healthy.
Man, how did you get into motorsports? Like, how did this whole journey start?
Yeah, I mean, I've obviously done this since 1997, so it's been a long time. But I was working in the UK in a University of Surrey, and I had my own sports injuries clinic there. I was doing all the personal training, teaching classes, and I just for a change, I was always into my skiing and climbing. So I used to teach climbing, teach skiing, just to give myself a little bit of variety. And I always loved the travel. So I loved going to the different ski resorts when I was younger. And I was teaching a climbing lesson. And the guy that I was teaching came into my sports injuries clinic afterwards to pay the check. And he said, "Hey, what are you doing here?" And I'm like, "Oh, this is my kind of like proper job. I'm a sports therapist, trainer." And he said, "Hey, look, I work for McLaren Formula One team, and we're looking to get a therapist on board to work with the drivers to kind of like improve what we're doing from a human performance level. Would you be interested?" And at the time, I was kind of like, I was really enjoying what I was doing. I was working with the British athletics team. I was working with members of the England rugby team. I had a whole host of scholarship students I was working with that came to the university on sporting scholarships, working with sort of some of the British fencing team guys. And I had recently connected to some of the physios that were working at Wimbledon. And I was quite interested in tennis for some of the same reasons I like Formula One, travel and what have you. And anyway, long story short, I went to McLaren, met David Coulthard, went up to London. Mika Hakkinen was staying in one of the hotels up there, just did some work on them, and went to Australia in '97 with them. I think at the time David Coulthard had a back problem. I fixed it. He won the race, and then the team said, "Hey, come to the next races with us." And then, ironically, after that, maybe after 4 or 5 races, Mika sort of said, "Hey, I want to see you. Can we have a chat?" He was like, "Would you be my trainer? I want you to be my trainer. We do all the races together, and all this sort of stuff." So I ended up sort of training Mika and became his trainer. I still did all the physio work with David as well. But then I had to give up my clinic in the UK because I was just never there. So that's how I got into it. So in a way, it was like just one of these moments in time where guy came in for a climbing lesson and kind of went from there.
Were you a fan of motorsports or Formula One before?
Not at all. Do you know the funniest thing was, I remember it was only maybe 6 months before that I was watching a race, and Mika was there, on TV, and I was looking at the name, and I'm like, Hakkinen, I couldn't even pronounce it. And I was just trying to figure out how to pronounce a name, and I watched it, and I wasn't really interested in Formula One at all. Motorsport didn't really do much for me at that particular time. So yeah, it was like I didn't really have any desired dream to work in Formula One. So it was something I just kind of fell into, and then kind of like it changed a little bit.
What do you think is the deciding factor? Because you know, there's many drivers we haven't the slightest idea who their coach is, you know, or if they even have one, you know, specific to them. And then you have like, you know, you have Angela Colin, who's, you know, very notorious around the grid. You've got, you know, Italiano around the grid, you know, yourself. What is it about a coach that, like, you have that Mika Hakkinen moment where they're like, yeah, you're my guy. Like, don't ever leave my side until I retire.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, really, because I mean, Angela with Lewis, great relationship, great dynamic. Michael, I know very well, and his sort of stuff with Daniel. I think the thing is, you're with these guys so much that you develop a very close bond and relationship with them. So, like, I was with Kimi for 20 years. I mean, for me to kind of say 20 years seems like crazy, but you're almost like family. It's like I knew his parents really well. Obviously spent a lot of time with him in Finland and just doing the training with him and what have you. And you develop a bond. So everything you do is kind of like you're doing it together with one sole purpose, to try and allow him to win the world championship. That's always the goal, no matter who you're working with as a driver. And then you go through that journey together, and obviously trust is something that needs to be earned. So it's kind of like having that trust in someone. And all the drivers, like I say, they're all a little bit different, and they're all unique in their own sort of quirky way. And then, like I say, if you click with a trainer you're working with, and you find that relationship adds to your performance, keeps you calm, whatever else, like I say, it's not something you want to let go of. So yeah, like I said, I think what is that one special thing? I think it's just that bond that you create with a driver. Either it works and clicks, or it doesn't. But I think the loyalty factor comes into it in a big way. Yeah, like I say, I don't know, you live it together. It's just such a bizarre world, because when you're in Formula One, it's a high pressure environment. I mean, these guys go into a race weekend, and if they're not performing that year, especially like in Ferrari, when you've got the whole of the country watching, there's so much pressure involved, and one bad race weekend can spark off this whole chain reaction where they might not get a drive the following year. So it's so like I say, you go through all of that together, and there are highs and there are lows, and the lows, you're only ever as good as your last race. And some of the lows that we've had have been incredible, in terms of either a driver making an error or the car blowing up. Like in the early days, an engine was designed to last one race.
Right.
And it's a completely different sport now. But the amount of times that we were in McLaren, like 2005, you'd be in a great position and the car would blow up. That's just the way Formula One was. So you'd have this situation where you have a really quick car, and there's no reason why you can't win the race, but then the engine blows or something else goes wrong. So it's but then you have the highs as well. So like with Kimi, we came close 2003 to winning the world championship. I think we lost by 1 or 2 points to Michael. 2005, I mean, it was just like an unbelievable car, but like I said, just didn't finish enough races. And then Kimi lost that championship. But then we went to Ferrari 2007, and against all odds in the last race, sort of starting third in the championship, won it. Yeah. With Mika, I was actually really lucky in my early years, because when I went to McLaren in '97, the car wasn't an amazing car. Adrian Newey came in as a designer, and I remember in McLaren we were trying to basically recreate the Williams front wing, and teams would always try and figure out how high it is, what dimension it is. So there's things you put next to the car, or you try to, that you know the height of, that you know the dimensions of, so you can get an idea of what this Williams front wing was like. And Adrian came into McLaren. It's like, my God, you guys were so far off. He designed sort of things like the front wing, and the car's automatically just quick, a lot quicker. And I remember at the end of '97, Mika won his first race in Jerez, when Jack Villeneuve won the championship. And then in '98, we had an amazing car. And so I sort of started in '97. By the end of '99, we won 2 world championships with Mika. We came sort of runner-up in 2000. So you go through those highs, but then, like I say, for whatever reason, you can go through the lows as well. And we had many throughout the season. So Mika, there was a situation in Monza, again, really high pressure situation, fighting for the championship, made a mistake, spun off and hit the wall. And I think there's been obviously a couple of pictures and videos of him kneeling down, just distraught, because he knows it's his error. And I think when the driver makes a mistake, they're much harder on themselves, because I made the mistake. If the car blows up, you can be frustrated, pissed off, but it's not your fault. So it's easier to get over those sort of things. But
do you feel like you're the most trusted person in the paddock with your driver? I mean, do you?
Yeah, I mean, I think with the driver you work with, you have that level of trust, because the feeling that they should have is they can trust you with everything. Because Formula One, I mean, they're celebrities as well as athletes,
right?
And there's a lot of stuff that could leak out in certain ways in certain situations. And I think, like I say, trust is built over time. And it's I think if someone wanted to make money off of stories, it's very easy to.
Yeah.
But like I say, you go through all of this together, and you develop this bond and this level of trust. And yeah, so I think for the individual drivers, as with maybe any athletes, you develop that trust with someone that, you know, I can rely on this person for this. I don't have to worry about it. And again, like I say, a lot of what I try and do over a race weekend is make sure that the driver only has to worry about the driving, nothing else, not who's going to pick him up from the airport, or how he's going to get to the track, or does he have to worry about his kit? Has he got a new helmet turning up that needs to be sorted out? All of these sort of things I try and take away, just so they're little things they don't have to worry about. So they can just focus on talking to the engineers, driving the car, and okay, they have to do the media appearances and all these other things. So with that, you just try and help structure the weekend a little bit, saying to the marketing department, it's like, I don't know, it's a difficult one, because I don't know of any other sport where you might have a qualifying session and it goes horribly wrong. I don't know, you're expected to do really well, you hit the wall, and the first thing you have to do is go into the media pen and face the media. And they all ask you, what happened? Why did you make the mistake? And like the football team might come off the football pitch, or hockey team, or whatever team it is, and they can go into the dressing room and they can sit down together and they can sort of, well, that was a disaster. How can we learn from it? What can we do? And you can kind of compose yourself before you might then have to talk to the media. But Formula One is quite brutal in that respect, and you can't really escape it. So I think it's a difficult sport in comparison to some others because of that.
How involved are you mentally? Because you've been in some championship bouts. I mean, you've had championship success. You know, you've had some championships lost by a point. You know, I mean, Kimi arguably is one of the best drivers of our generation. And, you know, he's come within a hair of many, many more championships. How does that matter? I mean, these guys wake up to win. They don't wake up to be second place or third place. And, you know, how mentally taxing is a season like that on a driver?
Incredibly. I mean, I think people don't quite understand how mentally demanding it is. I mean, in any sport, not just Formula One. But I think sometimes, like if I look back to the Ferrari years, I mean, the pressure is so intense. You can't go into another team like Ferrari, from the pressure that you feel on top of you, from the expectation of the country, from the expectation of the media, to foresee all of these sort of things. It's an incredible environment. And I think from a mental side, I think you have to have a lot of mental strength to deal with these sort of situations. And Kimi was quite incredible in the fact that he did have a lot of mental strength, and he had the ability to, as soon as the race weekend was over, if it had gone badly, he could very quickly put that in the past. He didn't think about it going forwards. And I think this is like, from a mental point of view, you could look at this in lots of ways of life. I mean, why worry about what's happened in the past? Nothing you can do to change it, but a lot of people still do. And Kimi was actually very good at putting negative events in the past. That's happened. This is the future. This is the now. How can I focus on the next race and making sure everything goes as according to plan as possible? And again, every driver is different, and only working with the sort of drivers I've worked with, I can kind of like, I know how they deal with it. Other drivers might deal with it differently, and some of them need a circle of friends around them that help to kind of like bring them up if things haven't gone so well. So yeah, like I say, I mean, from a mental point of view, I don't think anyone would really kind of understand, unless you're actually in that environment, how tough it is. But I think, like I say, with all of this mental health thing, that's obviously that's something that's become bigger over the last sort of 3 to 4 years. I think athletes coming out and saying, I've struggled with this, whether it's tennis players or whatever else, team bosses sort of saying, hey, this is like the pressure we're under to perform. And in Formula One, there's millions of dollars on the line for the teams as well. So it's, I'd say, like I say, from a pressure point of view, from a mental point of view, it's actually very tough.
I feel like that's the one misunderstanding of Kimi that has always kind of been out there, especially to new fans, is like, he just doesn't care. It's like, yeah, no,
Yeah,
he does. Otherwise he wouldn't be there.
Sure. Yeah. I
He's,
mean, Kimi was unique. But I think the impression people get from seeing Kimi at a race weekend, if it's on camera or if they see him walking somewhere, is that he doesn't care and whatever else, and he just wanders off. I mean, Kimi has a huge heart, and unless you really see him in situations that are the true him, you would never know that. He's got an incredible sense of humor. I mean, like, he's had me in tears in the past, and it's there's parts of his character that people just wouldn't imagine would exist because of what they see on TV. And like with all the race stuff, he wants to win. He's so competitive. And like, I remember playing badminton with him when I first started working with him, and we were in Finland and we played badminton, and I beat him like hands down. And he just kept on wanting to play more games, more games, more games. Don't stop, want to carry on. And he was so desperate to win. And he went back to his parents' place afterwards, and his mum spoke to me saying, "What happened?" He came in, he threw his bag down, he stormed off. And do you know what? He practiced and practiced and practiced to the point I couldn't beat him. Couldn't. I mean, it was always close, but he would always win. And it was like that pure determination and competitive streak in him to, I'm not going to lose to this guy, and I'm going to practice like crazy until I can beat him. And he did. And we used to play, and like, I'd win maybe 1 or 2 games out of 5. But he would, like I say, he would never get to the point where he wouldn't win. He was just so determined. And then we started playing with Sebastian. I think we were in Malaysia somewhere, and Sebastian was around, and we said we were going to play badminton, and he's like, "Yeah, I come." So him and his trainer came, and we played against them, and it was the same. Kimi was beating him left, right, and centre, and then Sebastian went away, practiced like crazy, and the next time we played him, he was a lot better. So it's this competitive instinct and this desperate desire not to lose. I am not going to be beaten. It's like, it's insane, and I think that's why they're so good, because they are so competitive, and they will make sure they practice something to the point where they can be the best they can be. And then you've also got the natural talent side. So it's like, you could say, I mean, I think one of Kimi's sort of biggest assets was his pure natural talent. I mean, to know what was going on under his ass in the car, it was like, was it again insane. We were in McLaren, and I can't remember which race we were at, but it was I don't know, maybe 2003 2004, and Kimi came into the garage and came onto the radio with the engineer saying, look, there's a crack somewhere in the chassis. I'm going into the corners and I know that it's there. There's some level of flexibility that's too much. There's something wrong with the car. And it's somewhere on my right-hand side. And they stripped the car down. They said, we've had a look through the car. We cannot find anything wrong. Next day, he goes out, look, there's something wrong with the car. It's not handling properly. It's doing this, it's doing that. And they're like, look, we've been through it again. We cannot find anything wrong with the car. Race weekend finished, and I can't remember where we finished in that particular race weekend. And I was with Kimi in the gym, and he got a phone call from the factory. Hey, just gone through the chassis and found a small crack on the right-hand side. And it's like he could feel it, but they couldn't see it until they got it back to the factory and could properly like scan the whole thing and see what was going on. So that level of natural talent in him was just enormous. Whereas other drivers, to get that last 1% to 2%, just have to work and work and work, and they will, to achieve it. So in every sport, you have these super talented individuals where it's just like, my God, there's just so much natural talent. And you have the ones that have a lot of natural talent, but that last 1% or 2%, they just need to work like crazy to achieve.
How is it for a guy like that? And again, I don't want to get too far into the weeds with Kimi personally, but like, how do you go from McLaren, Ferrari, and then to Alpha, where you're kind of fighting for 10th, you're fighting for 8th place? He seemed like he was having fun, but and when I hear a badminton story that, like, I'm a professional race car driver, but I lost a game of badminton, therefore I'm going to dedicate my free time to badminton just to win. Like, how much of an effect does that have on a driver? Because you're witnessing that with Ricardo today, which is like, do you want to go take the Haas seat, battle at the back of the grid to stay on the grid for a better seat later? And me personally, I say, go for it, do it. But then I think of that, like, I just want to win attitude. Can a competitor sit back there for a year or two?
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, I think once Kimi was lucky, or his managers planned it well, or however you want to sort of say it. He was always in a competitive car. You might have years where, like 2004 in McLaren, car was not great. But generally speaking, McLaren provided a quick car. Then you go to Ferrari, it's a quick car. It's like we came to Lotus and you never quite know what's going on. We had a quick car. Kimi won sort of a couple of races, was scoring points like crazy. And I think he went through a career where pretty much, maybe not every year, but you had a chance to win the race, or at least podium. There was that fighting chance there. And I think when you're in a car that's kind of like close to the back of the grid, for whatever reason, it's difficult for someone that's always been competing at the front to be in that situation. You can do it because, Kimi started his career in Sauber, and there was a desire to go back and help them develop the car. And it was like his career going full circle. And I think he enjoyed the challenge. And the first year we were there, the car was reasonably competitive and we had some good results. But it's, like I say, the bigger teams have bigger budgets and they attract the best designers. They organize all of these components together in a way that works. And I think we had good people at Alpha, but when it's the third year, and I remember Kimi sort of saying to me after a race, "What are we doing? I just had a good race in 16th." It's like, and so they do question it for sure. So I think everyone's different when you've had that career. Kimi's career was 20 years.
Yeah.
20. I worked with him 20, so it was 21 years. So it's a long career for a Formula One driver. He also wanted to spend more time with the family and have that sort of life. He was sort of 41 when he retired, so so he'd had a good career. So I think there are other elements that come into it. If he was still 34, maybe he would have carried on longer because maybe he wanted his career to carry on longer. But in his situation, he had already achieved so much and driven with lots of the top teams. He'd already won the world championship, so it's I think it's a different perspective. And I think the funny thing is, it's like your perspective changes.
Yeah.
I remember sort of us finishing third. Like, my God, we were third. And now 10th is like, we came 10th, we got a point. It's like everything's relative to where you are. So it's
I feel like retirement suits him so well. I like, as a dad myself, I really enjoy watching him, like taking his son out karting and seeing him on the side of the track, you know, in the tires and in the chassis of the go-kart.
Yeah, he's a great
I feel like I can connect with him more now than
sure.
you know, when he was a professional race car driver. So
yeah, sure. Yeah, it's great to see. It's like, say, he's a great dad. He's very hands-on, and I think he really genuinely enjoys it. So it's nice to see. His daughter, though, is if there's ever going to be a Formula One female driver, his daughter is like, she's so sort of stubborn, determined. She's just like him. So it's like she's like, we would be in the gym and she'd be on the TRX and she'd be hanging and spinning, and I'm like, I need this for the next exercise. No, I'm on here. So I had to change exercise that we were doing because she would want to carry on hanging and spinning, and she was there for ages. It's like crazy determination. But it's like I say, it's great to see that he now has that family time.
yeah, I've had Tatiana Calderon and Abby Eaton on the show as well, and both of them have that deep determination. I love talking to competitors. High performing competitors. They just like don't take no for an answer. I love that personality. I actually can't wait if she's going to take that route. I'd love to see another Raikkonen out there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it may well happen.
What in Formula One, what has been your pinch me moment? Like, what's been the coolest experience you've had on the grid where you're like, I can't even believe that I'm here?
I think going back to kind of like, I think the sport has obviously changed quite a lot. I remember 97, probably when I was first on the grid. It's like TV cameras everywhere, super noisy because the cars were just a lot noisier then, and massive tires. And when the cars kind of like left for the formation lap, you just got showered in rubber. And it's kind of that whole combination of smell, noise, rubber, atmosphere, going to places like Monza or Imola, where the fans, the passion in the fans, you couldn't squeeze another person in there, but you felt the atmosphere. I think these sort of things I remember. I mean, for me personally, not on the grid, but I'd worked for McLaren for 10 years, 5 with Mika and David, 5 with Kimi. We went to Ferrari, and I remember putting the Ferrari kit on for the first time. That was a pinch me moment because I couldn't. I was there in red, having fought against them for so many years in McLaren. But yeah, I think there's so many moments you go through, and I think a lot of the time you're really focused just on what you're doing because you want to make sure you get everything right, because there's such a limited amount of time to remember everything that happens on the grid. It's like, okay, at 42, they've got to be at the front of the grid for the national anthem. That starts at 43. It's like there's a window of opportunity when they get to the grid, they can jump out to go to the toilet. You've got to find out where the closest toilet is. Can you go to the motorhome, where they need to be afterwards? You need to make sure from the parade lap, from the national anthem, they're back in the car. They've got time to speak to the engineer. They're always kind of checking what time it is. So that there's so much stuff going on. And then you look around and there's Sylvester Stallone standing next to you, or sort of some of these sort of big celebrities that are there and they're wandering around. You kind of like look around and think, oh, that was Sylvester Stallone. Oh, that was Paris Hilton, sort of thing. Kind of like these sort of characters pass you by, but because you're so focused, I think in any other situation, you'd be kind of like thinking, oh, that's cool, Sylvester Stallone. Whereas you don't really think about it at the time. So it's, so I think, like I say, there's been so many sort of times for me where you do kind of pinch yourself. We're so privileged to be able to travel the world the way we travel, stay in great hotels. I love traveling, so for me that's actually a big bonus. Taya, my girlfriend, she travels with me because she set up her own business, so she comes to at least half the races, so it allows me to have a life with her together. But yeah, like I say, it's a privilege. And like I say, I think that's a big thing that I try not to forget, because I really enjoy it as well. It's like it's been a great journey for the past 25, 26 years. So I wouldn't say there's one defining moment. Winning the championship, kind of like seeing the driver on the podium when he's won a world championship, like with Mika the twice, Kimi the once. It's they're kind of the moments where you think we actually achieved the goal we set out to achieve. Our aim was to win the world championship, and we won it. And I think once you've worked with a driver that's won it at least once, then you've achieved that dream with the driver. If you just missed it, like the heartbreaking moment for Felipe Massa in Brazil, where he lost it on the last lap, and you couldn't, if that was a movie, you couldn't make it up. I mean, you'd say, well, that would never happen in real life, but it did. But then the heartbreak of, my God, is like you missed it by that much. He never won a world championship, but it was that close. I think for me, sort of, it's just a great feeling that you've actually achieved what you set out to achieve. So I think all of these sort of things, it's kind of like, it's easy to look back and think about all of that, because at the time, it just happens. You don't comprehend it as it's actually happening.
Makes you appreciate it too. I think, it's really easy to be like, oh, there's so much travel and hotels and airfare and blah, 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 and schedules and chaos and whatever. And then look back and be like, wow, I got to stand on the grid with a world champion 3 times.
Yeah.
I got to hang out with Stallone, and I was the celebrity. He looked to me for information, not the other way around. I think it's good perspective to reminisce. What didn't you expect when you arrived to Formula One?
What didn't I expect? I mean, I think I didn't really know much about Formula One before I started working in it, in terms of what would happen over a race weekend, etc., etc. I think from a pure training point of view, it's very different, because driving a car is like, a lot of people that don't understand Formula One don't understand the physical demands of driving a Formula One car. And as a trainer coming into Formula One, you have to understand and learn all this stuff pretty quickly. So and it's not like I can go out and drive a car and see what it feels like and think, oh yeah, I need to do this. So I think that adaptation, sort of understanding what Formula One driver needs in terms of the fitness side. And again, that's changed multiple times over the years. When we had refueling in the cars, then the car is like doing a qualifying lap every single lap of the race. The physical demands were a lot higher, whereas as soon as you had a full tank of fuel, I mean, Kimi once described it as, we're just driving around. I get told by the engineer to slow down because otherwise we're going to run out of fuel. I mean, all these sort of things, the car becomes slower. But then some years you have higher levels of downforce that you have to compensate for, because the neck's going to just have to deal with a lot more G-force, etc. So I think that when I came into the sport, I didn't understand as much because I'd never done it before. But they're the sort of things you learn. And like I say, that changes from year to year. I didn't know what the travel was going to be like because I'd never traveled that much. I just love traveling, but I wouldn't say until I worked in Formula One that I've really traveled. And then it just kind of like, you feel like, well, you are pretty much traveling every week. So that side of things was an eye opener. Yeah, I think just seeing the world, seeing how different countries are, like Japan for me is fascinating. It's probably the one country that sort of it's just like going somewhere completely different, because you don't recognize the brands and everything's a little bit different. And for me, that's really cool. It's cool to see these sort of things. But yeah, like I say, they're the main things really. It's I guess you don't know what you don't know. So it's like, until you actually jump into these sort of things, you don't quite know what they're going to be like. But yeah, like I said, I think the other thing that's really cool is, like, we're just a moving circus. There's so many people that work for so many different teams in the course of a career. I know so many people in the paddock because I've either worked with them at one team, they've gone somewhere else, or I've gone to another team, and it's actually a really nice feeling when you've been there that long, because you feel so many people. It's almost like a home. It sounds really strange, but it's that's a really nice part for me of the Formula One side.
I I I can't relate to you yet, but I can tell you that having done this show, when I went to Austin 2 weeks ago, to be texting people in the paddock, that are on TV during the event, and it's like, hey, I just got to Austin, where's the best place for me to sit, and I really wanted to kind of move around the track versus like get a seat and be stuck there. And I think it was one of the Williams guys told me, to go find places on the track with high speed turns and extreme deceleration and acceleration. And so I just got general admin tickets so I could go find those places. And it was really neat to be able to text, the guy at Williams or like Italiano and be like, where do I go?
Yeah.
What's going on? Like it changes the experience. I can't imagine if I was walking around and talking to them during the event as well. It's got to be a neat feeling to be at home in kind of a world that fans, are really passionate. There's some really passionate fans in this sport.
Yeah, it's incredible.
You see that today. I mean, it's the fastest growing sport globally, and it's the most engaged sport on social media in the world.
Yeah, sure. It's incredible. Yeah. I mean, the fans and like Austin now, it's like, I mean, how it's grown.
Yeah.
And I think like looking at a race in Las Vegas, it will be amazing because the fans get that spectacle. But going back to what you were saying about going to different places around the track, I mean, it's really hard to appreciate watching on TV what it's like on the track. And the speed at which these guys go around corners is just insane. In Ferrari, we had a 3-seater Formula One car. So Marlboro, who were the sort of title sponsor at the time, they would do a global competition. So one person from each country would have the opportunity to win that particular competition. They'd fly them to Maranello. They'd tour the factory, and then they got to sit in a 3-seater Formula One car with one of the drivers who would take them round for a load of laps. So there's the driver, and there's two where the side pods are, two really small little things that you have to cross your legs, sit in. You're belted up, you have to cross your arms. And I went in this with Kimi and one of his friends. And even though I've worked in Formula One for many years, to actually get in a car and go around the track with Kimi, I mean, it was just insane. And the most impressive thing, honestly, is the deceleration. The speed at which these things can slow down. I remember going to a corner which was pretty much 90 degrees, thinking, there is no way we're going to slow down and get around that corner. And then all of a sudden it's like, and you're around the corner. It's like, my God. And then there's like a chicane, and it's just and it's just crazy feeling. So the acceleration is impressive. The cornering speed is nuts. And but the deceleration is just crazy. And I did, I think, 6 laps with Kimi, and my neck was shut for like 2 days.
So my son started karting last year, and we went to this track in Florida, and just on vacation. It was like the girls went and did massages or something, got their nails done. So we're like, oh, let's go find a go-kart track. And so we go out, and it's like, where's the fastest go-karts available? And in St. Pete, Florida. And so we find this track, and we're out there, and my son knows what he's doing, and it messes with your mind, because in a normal road car, you slow down and kind of coast or continue slowing down through a corner. When you're in a go-kart is nothing like a Formula One car. You brake, and then you accelerate through the turn. And yet, like, everything in your head after 20, 30, 40 years of driving a road car tells you, no, don't do it. And I couldn't get lap time. And my son's like, follow me, and they had brake lights on them, so I could find his brake zones. And, it was just like, it defied all logic in my head to do that. I can't imagine what it would be like to take a Formula One car around. And you're right. This is my race experience. You know, I have track position data, the live feed, like I have all this stuff. It's nothing like being at the track.
Yeah, sure,
15
sure.
feet from the track is a pretty intense place.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But no, it's like it is crazy when I think like just the experience you have in karting. I think if people want to get some semblance of understanding of what driving does to the body, go kart for 2 hours.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and tell me how you feel the next day. It's not like driving a normal car. But then you just look at the pressure these guys have to put on the brake. I mean, you're obviously braking with one foot, accelerating with the other, and it creates this asymmetrical load in the pelvis. And that's something we have to address as therapists, as trainers. But the pressure they put on the brake and the later you can brake, the better.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just it's like I say, just on a different level. But like you say, it doesn't defy logic. Sometimes when you're losing the car, I mean, Mika was like, if he lost the car, he just hit the throttle to correct it. And like the logic is take your foot off the pedal and hit the brake, but then it normally goes. So it's like all of these sort of things that we would do naturally driving a normal car. It's hard to, but it's like you said, going into a normal Formula One car. If you or me try to drive one, these tires need to be hot to get grip, and the brakes need to be hot to work. If you're not aggressive when you go out the garage with the brakes and with the tires, it ain't going to brake and it's not going to grip. You just go straight off. It's so it's just a completely different level with all this sort of stuff to normal driving and what we would perceive as sort of being in the car.
On that note, I mean, you've gone through some serious iterations of car throughout your career. Has the engine affected the way that you prepare a driver for this? I mean, was it a V10 or a V12 when you started?
I think when I started for the first year, it was V12 and then went to V10.
I mean, does that have a decreasing effect on the body, or the cars getting faster, or?
I think sometimes it comes down to other effects like downforce. So you can have an engine that's super powerful, but if there's not so much downforce and the driver has to brake a lot earlier, the cornering speed will be less. So there's less G-force on the neck, for example. So a lot of it's defined by that. Like the cars, when they're full of fuel, are a lot heavier.
Mm-hmm.
So you might have to brake a little bit earlier. But the cornering speed again isn't maybe as great. Like going back to what I said earlier about the refueling, when there was refueling in Formula One, that's when I would say Formula One physically was the most challenging. But again, I think Formula One always finds a way to catch up with speed if they try and do things to slow the cars down, like add grooves to the tires the way they did. It slows the cars down for maybe a season. By the end of that season, they're pretty much as quick as they were the season before. And the following season, they're even quicker. So the engineers, aerodynamicists, they will find ways to always make the car go quicker. But sometimes it's like, if I look at in Ferrari, was it 2000? Can't remember, 2014, when we had the KERS came in. The KERS system weighed so much that the cars had to be a certain weight, and any weight over that, you'd just be, if you like, penalized because your car was too heavy, so you'd be losing lap time. And there was so much pressure to make the cars lighter, so teams were shaving like 0.5 millimeter off all of the parts in the gearbox just to try and take weight off the car, trying to come up with ways to take weight off certain parts of the car. And obviously one way to reduce the weight is to get the driver to weigh less. So it's so engineers just think pure weight, whereas I have to think performance.
Right.
So there's only so much. These guys aren't fat, so you can't take much fat off of them. And then we had to change the training to actually reduce muscle mass. So muscle weighs 4 times as much as fat. If I can take a kilo off of Kimi, I should have actually charged them per kilo. It would have been worth millions. But it's but I think, like I say, in that particular sort of period of time, there was so much pressure on drivers to reduce weight. And because I think it must have been when Felipe was our teammate, because Felipe was a small guy, he was super light, and Kimi would be losing like a couple of tenths a lap to him if he was a little bit overweight in the car, because that was just his weight. And we couldn't take physically much more weight off of him without compromising his performance. So I'd say they were challenging times. So it had nothing really to do with the engine per se. It just had to do with the weight limits on the car and how big the driver was, or heavy the driver was in comparison to the teammate, or whether other cars had managed to create a car that was just a little bit underweight. They could then move that weight around the car from a weight distribution point of view in a way that engineer would want. So that was definitely challenging. But like I say, other than that, the body adapts, or the driver adapts quite quickly to a new season and a new challenge. But yeah, that was an interesting one.
So the way that I always wrap up my conversations, because everybody has a different, I'll call it, vantage point to the sport. I've been writing on Quora, which is a question answer site for a number of years, and the main question that I get, I don't know why they ask me, but I get this question all the time, is, I'm whatever years old and I want to be a Formula One driver. And I think it's an interesting question because obviously, most drivers start when they're like 4 years old.
Yeah.
But everyone that I interview has a different kind of vantage to that driver. I think you have a very unique vantage point. What are the, and you kind of got into this earlier, but like, what are those unique characteristics that you run across, because you've run across a number of champions in your time? What is that X factor that they all have, that, if I'm 14 years old and I want to be a Formula One driver, this is the first thing I'm going to look for in myself before I answer that question?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I think if I look at the drivers I've worked with, most of them started doing something with an engine when they were in their kind of like either 3, 4, 5, and they developed a natural sense of what was happening with that particular whatever they were driving at a very young age. And I think anything we do when we're young, especially that young, we just have more inbuilt sensibility to that. So it's I think from driving, like I say, Kimi was doing all sorts of things with an engine from a very young age. I think Sebastian was as well. Mika was. So I think a big part is that it's like I ski, but I started skiing in my early teens. If I compare my skiing to someone that started skiing when they were 4 or 5, my skiing's at a decent level, but they've got a feeling that I haven't. If I wanted to be a ski racer, and I did try it for a little while, you look at some of these guys that have been skiing since they were 3 or 4, and you're like, I can't compete with that. No matter how much I work, I cannot go back in time and develop that sensitivity to that particular sport. So I think a big part of it is having that early experience of driving something and knowing what your body can do in that environment. I think from the physical side, the pure training side, that can be trained. I mean, for someone to sit in the neck machine that we use and do what a driver does, that would be a wake-up call to just how strong the neck needs to be. But like I say, the physical side can be trained, and you can do sort of single-seater series or drive single-seater cars and get used to it and do more and more and more. And for sure, you could be competitive. But I'd say, like I say, to be really on the level of some of these guys, it's so inbuilt from such a young age, it would be difficult to compete against that. Like I say, I'm not saying it can't be done, but it's I think if you're like late teens and you want to be a Formula One driver, just the process that you need to go through to get into something that's going to give you the experience and then be good enough at it and have the financial backing to take it further. It costs so much money now to get into F3, F2, and then F1. If you haven't got financial backing, it makes it incredibly difficult. So there might be some super talented kids out there that would never actually get the opportunity to get to Formula One just from a financial point of view, which I find a bit sad. I think when I first came into the sport, and especially looking at someone like Kimi, for sure, his managers spotted him karting, offered him a long contract, and then it was their responsibility to find him drives. But then he shined because of the natural talent. It's a long-winded way to answer your question, but it's
no, that's the best kind of answer. if you asked me a question, I would talk for probably 10 minutes. So
to the point where you forgot what the question was. Yeah,
exactly. But that's the authenticity of the conversation. I that's what I've always wanted this to be, is a place to have a conversation and speak freely. Because I do think that, a lot of young people have these ambitions, or they jump on a computer game and they're like, oh, I can beat Kimi Raikkonen on a video game, therefore I am good enough to drive. But they lack that, what was it in Rush? I have a very sensitive butt, and it's like, there's a lot of truth to that, and knowing, that feeling of not just the structure of the car, which that's fascinating to me, that he can feel a crack in the chassis, but also just, the communication of the behavior, when we're at the kart track, it's like, what is it doing and how can I communicate that? And it's not a video game. It's not a setting, that you can kind of click through. It's, if the setting's wrong, you're slow, you don't qualify, you don't race, or, your race is ruined. It's a finite amount of time and a finite amount of resources. And
sure.
It's,
I think the other amazing thing for me is, like, there's so much that the driver has to do in a split second. You look at the start of a race, and especially if it's wet and they can't see what's going on. It's like, how do they do what they do? Sometimes it amazes me watching it. I asked Kimi once, how do you actually see in the wet? He goes, oh, I hear the engine sound. I hear when the car in front is actually slowing down, braking. If I can't physically see what's going on, I know roughly where the corner is. And like I say, these guys do that with 6-7 other cars around them within that much distance. So there's so many sort of variables that you throw into the mix. It's not just, can you drive the car quickly? It's what's your spatial awareness like? How close can you get to the other car without hitting them and having some massive accident? It's all of these sort of things I find fascinating, because it's not just, like, say, about driving a car quickly. There's all of these other components thrown in. It's like I'm juggling with 3 balls, but then you want me to send a text message and balance on one foot at the same time, and now I'm going to make it rain. Your brain and body has to compute all of this and make a split-second decision. So I think, like I say, all of that's thrown into the mix as well.
There's a YouTube video that just came out. I think it was for the Mexico Grand Prix. It's Sergio in front of a huge screen and an audience holding the steering wheel. He can't see the screen, and he's clicking through the gears and turning the steering wheel without knowing where he's at. And everything he's doing is mirroring him on the actual track doing the race. And, that's a phenomenal skill set that is not accumulated in, a video game or an idea of wanting to do something.
Yeah, and I know certainly at Ferrari in Fiorano, the track that is at Maranello, Michael in the past, Kimi when we were there, they'd be driving, and there wasn't a finish time. Got dark, they're still driving. There's no lights on the car. But they'd just be driving the circuit. And Kimi got to the point where he said, I can't do it anymore because the dashboard lights are so bright, I'm just getting dazed. But he could drive in the dark because he knew where the track was. So, like I say, Michael was doing the same when he was there. So I think they do so many laps of these circuits. And one thing I used to do with Mika was a lot of visualization work. So I used to put him in a dark room in the driving position, and he would just have to talk me through his perfect lap. But okay, from everything in terms of what part of the corner he was hitting, what part of the curve, what gear he was in, where he was going to start braking. And then he would tell me the lap time he'd done in his perfect lap. We always used to do this before qualifying. And he'd come out with a time, and sometimes it was so much quicker than anything we'd done in practice. And he was normally, I'd say, 85% of the time within a tenth of the time he told me he was going to do. It's just, and it's just all of these sort of things. Like it's incredible. But like the Sergio thing, they know the track and they can visualize it. So what's going through their mind is just being on the track, doing what they would do. and then you see it on the screen thinking, wow, because it is wow.
Yeah, it is. Well, Mark, man, thank you so much for coming on here. I honestly, as I'm sitting here, I'm trying to respect your time, and I'm also thinking I could probably talk for another 3 hours and just listen to stories that you have accumulated over the last couple of decades in the sport. So
yeah, no, it's
we'll
been a
have
pleasure.
to have an unpack episode sometime.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. No, but like I say, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, I appreciate it. This is going to be one of those conversations I think that people are going to really connect to. So I genuinely, I'm thankful that you came on the show and responded to me and worked out your schedule for this.
No, thank you. And for everyone watching, thank you for being fans, because you guys are what makes the sport happen. And it's great to see how it's taken off in the US.
Certainly. Well, go get to Vettel and have him finish his career out strongly.
Yeah, it would be great.
That's all on your shoulders, Mark.
Cool.
Thank you so much.
Take care, Ryan.